Very pleasant good morning, good afternoon, good evening, magandang umaga po, magandang tanghali, magandang hapon, at magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. Welcome to your hour, and this is Rita Gadi. Every Tuesday, we come around to talking about issues that were never talked about over the past 36 years. And we began this about 3 years ago because for about 33 years, 3 decades actually, we have remained silent. But then again, the issues that were raised over the past decade have been coming out over and over again. So there was this need for those who are capable and able to talk about these issues so that in some manner we can be able to come out with some answers to a lot of the issues that are being raised. What am I talking about? Well, we are facing now the national elections, May 9, and this is very critical as far as our country is concerned. Every election time is critical, but more so if the election is what we call the election for the office of the president, the vice president, members of the Senate, congressmen, and then, of course, the local officials, mayors of the cities and municipalities and their councils, and the governors of the different 81 provinces that we have. So this is really some massive kind of voting that will be occurring on May 9th. But prior to that, we have seen how candidates repeat themselves like it was before. Parang sinasabi nga natin wala na halos pagbabago sapagkat, well, tinatawag nga na mother statements or grandmother statements. Karamihan kasi ng mga sinasabi, kulang yung panahon. Lalo na ngayon na wala na yung mga malalaking tinatawag na rallies sa iba't ibang lugar. Kaya ang nangyayari ay pinipili na lang dun sa mga tinatawag na vote-rich areas kung saan doon sila nagkakampanya. But a different methodology is happening or has happened already. Because now we have several candidates for the office of the president and also for the office of the vice president. But we have the coming out of so many other issues that have already been brought out 36 years ago or even longer than that time. What am I talking about? Well, these are the questions that have always been raised by people and by the opposition against the Marcoses, the opposition against whatever administration is in power. There will always be this tinge or this color of what has happened 36 years ago during the administration of Ferdinand Edralin Marcos. Now we can see some kind of a reincarnation, if you would call it that, of the issues that were raised 36 years ago, because now we have a Ferdinand Marcos Jr. running for the office of the presidency. Now it is time that we are the ones, or the people are the ones who should ask the questions. Because prior to all the issues that were raised, sila ang opposition ang nagtatanong. Ano ba ang ninakaw? Ano ba ang ginawa during martial law? Ano ba yung mga tinorture, yung mga pinatay, etc.? Magkano ba ang kailangang bayaran? Now it is time that we have the people ask the questions. And I wrote down many of this. We have gathered this over the past 3 years, as a matter of fact, from the time we started our Rita Gadi Hour. And I have not raised this in the sense that I did not want to identify the individuals who were asking these questions. They come from all over the world, surprisingly, listening to our program. But, you know, to mention their names might jeopardize many of the biases and prejudices that people will be accusing them of. So what I did was I tried to gather all those questions that were raised para yun ang itatanong natin dun sa mga tao na nagtatanong din sa atin. Because I think over the past 3 years, we have really spoken quite extensively and in detail about the many issues regarding the administration of President Ferdinand E. Marcos. And then we repeat this so as to determine whether these issues that are being raised are now the same issues that they're raising to his junior, BBM, as he is fondly called, Bongbong Marcos. And this is the junior of Ferdinand Edralin Marcos. So one of the questions that we received was, paano ba naging presidente si Corazon Aquino? So this goes back all the way to 1986. We have, well, those joining the rallies, many of them perhaps were not even born at the time, 36 years ago. Kasi kung titingnan natin yung demographics ng, how we are going to divide the voters at this particular time, then you would have, for instance, well, if you go by generation, as far as the voters are concerned, I think they're called the millennials, di ba? So yung mga 18 years old until 25, yan yung generation na, I don't know, they call it the Generation Z or whatever else you call it. Pero ito yung mga 18 until 25, yung mga kabataan. So there is a demographic number that they say yung mga 18 to 25, mga 13 million yan. And then from those who are 26 until 41 years old, there are about 23.9 million of them. I'm getting this from the data that is being supplied by, a network. Then we have those from 42 years old to 57, mga 16.7 million daw yan. And then you have those from 58 upwards. Yan na yung, maybe that is where I belong already until those are close to 100 years old. So may mga 11.9 million. So that is supposed to be the demographic profile of the people that we see joining the caravans, the motorcades, the rallies, the different venues where the candidates speak. Be that as it may, kung pag-uusapan natin yung kanilang ages, marami dyan ay hindi siguro nila nasaksihan or alam yung nangyari 36 years ago nung panahon ni President Marcos, because that would have been 56 years ago if we get the timeline reckoning from 1965 when President Marcos was elected into office. So 1966 to 1986, and then from 1986 to the present, ganun kahaba yung panahon, 56 years. So what is it that many of the issues that are being raised against the Marcoses and now against his junior seem to be coming from the past? I mean, 36 years ago. And that's why the question that came up first, yung binabasa ko nga sa inyo na maraming nagtatanong, paano ba nangyari na si Mrs. Aquino naging presidente? Well, those who were born or already voting at the time, not born, pero yung mga nag-participate na during the snap elections na ang tawag in 1986. And that was the time na tumakbo si President Marcos for the snap elections, and Mrs. Aquino was the other candidate from the opposition. Yan yung opposition was the laban. Yan yung mga Liberal Party, yung mga opposition against the Marcoses. So siya ang pinili na kandidato. Early on, they had, of course, several personalities that were suggested, and one of them was Salvador Laurel. But then Mrs. Aquino had some kind of an emotional content as far as her candidate is concerned because of what happened to her husband, who was shot at the tarmac, that is Senator Benigno Aquino at the time. Kaya siya ang napili ng opposition. Pero paano ba siya naging presidente? That is the question, one of the first questions that they raised to me na tinanong. So, nagpatawag kasi ng snap election si President Marcos, so why did he have to call for a snap elections when his term of office would have ended in 1987? Kaya hindi na niya kailangan na magpatawag pa ng eleksyon ng 1986. 1985 nung nagpatawag siya, 1986 yung snap elections. But there was pressure there was pressure coming from the United States of America. Yan talaga klaro sapagkat nakita natin na nagkaroon ng maraming bisita na pumunta dito. Senators, former ambassadors, former members of the Pentagon, officials, lahat yan. Nagpunta dito, kinausap si President Marcos, etc. and all of that. They wanted him to form some kind of a coalition government or to step down at, maraming suggestions. And one of the last that came, you had former Ambassador Philip Habib, and then of course Paul Lacson, Senator Paul Lacson. Bakit yan dalawa ang medyo mabigat ang kanilang dating dito nung panahon na yon? Well, for one, Senator Lacson was sent here because they were looking for somebody who could be able to relate well with President Marcos. And since Senator Lacson was part of the contingent of the United States of America that fought here in our country in the last World War, and since President Marcos was also part of the United States Armed Forces in the Pacific, yung USAFENGAS in the Far East na sinasabi nga, so there would be some kind of a memory bonding. Kaya it would be easy for Senator Lacson to open up to President Marcos, kaya siya ang pinadala. And so then you had all of these exchanges that they had until finally the famous lines ng sinabihan nga ni Senator Lacson si President Marcos, cut and cut clean, something to that effect. But there were several other conversations also na nangyari. Pero yung balikan natin yung sinasabi nga, paano ba nangyari na hindi naman nanalo, naging Pangulo si Mrs. Aquino. So ganun nga, nagkaroon ng snap elections, and one of the other officials from Washington that also came and put pressure on President Marcos was si former Ambassador Philip Habib. And he had several, I don't know if that's the right word, pero parang demands nga na sinasabi. For one, kung pwede ay palitan na yung kanyang buong cabinet kasi 20 years na daw yan. Pangalawa, alisin daw si Mrs. Marcos sa kanyang mga posisyon kasi they were also suspecting na baka she will take over if anything happened to President Marcos. Then they were also very particular about the bases, yung American bases dito sa Pilipinas. And so they wanted to make sure na masisecure yung kanilang bases, and they did not like the fact that President Marcos reduced the timeline from 99 years to 25 years, and then from 25 years to a review of 5. Plus the fact that they also had the reduction of the hectarage that they were occupying, and of course what was also a little bit not acceptable to the Pentagon or to the American policymakers is the fact na sabi nga ni Marcos, we should not be dependent on what American Congress would pass as far as giving military aid or aid to the Philippines. Instead, yung paggamit nila ng bases, magbayad sila ng renta. So that would have be a regular monthly payment or yearly payment that they would make instead of the Philippines waiting for the American Congress to pass a bill apportioning how much they will give for aid. So ayaw ni Marcos ng ganon. Kailangan ginagamit ninyo yung dito, which is really for your defense more than it is for the defense of the country. Kasi nga, hindi naman pwede na basta papasok sila kung sakaring merong gegera dito sa atin. Remember how it was in the Second World War. Pinabayaan nga tayo dito for how many years that we were occupied by the Japanese. And so they came after the war in Europe at saka lang bumalik. The famous line of General MacArthur, I shall return. Bakit I shall return? Kasi nanggaling na nga dito, iniwanan tayo, tinapos muna yung gera sa Europe. So anyway, that's just a side comment that we're doing, but that's part of history. So that is what happened. There was pressure from Washington, from the policymakers. You must remember at the time, President Reagan was a very good friend of President Marcos, but there are officials in American bureaucracy, such as Secretary Schultz of the State Department, who are actually part of the defense of not just the South China Sea, but of America as far as world powers or other world powers are concerned. So there was pressure here on President Marcos because they wanted to secure that the American bases would be guaranteed to stay for not just until 1992, which is the end of the 25 years, but even beyond that. Remember, this was all happening during the time already of Mrs. Aquino. So, paano ba nangyari na si Mrs. Aquino nga ang naging presidente where there was a snap elections? Prior to the snap elections, there was already the propaganda machinery. Magaling sila dyan sa kanilang media. They control the Western press. They also control most of the media here in our country kasi ganun talaga ang may hawak ng ating media network, tinatawag ka, the oligarchs, Ayan, mga opposition against Marcos. Ayaw nila yung ginawa ni Marcos na magkakaroon ng urban land reform. Tapos yung land reform din, maraming nawalan ng kanilang mga hacienda and so forth, and many other things besides. So that was what happened, and that pressure actually had President Marcos telling Ambassador Habib and Paul Lacson that you cannot tell me how I would run my country better than I would. But be that as it may, talagang nagkaroon ng malaking pressure until there was this interview with David Brinkley in this television program, and that was when, with certain questions that were already programmed for President Marcos to give an answer, sinabi na niya, okay, I will call for a snap elections come next year. Kasi the interview was done sometime in November. Mrs. Marcos at the time was coming home from Moscow after the consecration of Our Lady of Fatima's image and Our Lady of Peace in the St. Louis Cathedral in Moscow. Pauwi na kami nun. I was covering Mrs. Marcos then, and we were in Tokyo when President Marcos on live television here was interviewed by Mr. Brinkley, and that was where he announced in November 1985 that there will be snap elections in February 7, 1986. So yun na nangyari. But prior to that, as I said, the machinery of propaganda and media was already running, and there was already the hovering albatross of all of these statements coming from everywhere that media was controlling na kung si Marcos ay tatakbo sa February 1986, mandadaya siya. There will be cheating that will be... So hindi pa nga nagsisimula yung campaign period ng February na yan, ng January and February. Ando na yung propaganda niyan. I am saying this in answer to a deja vu of what seems to be happening now, because lately, over the past week or so, we have been hearing, on social networking, that the opposition will not accept Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to win in this election or something, and they're already, there is already all of this movement that a massive electoral protest will be presented to the COMELEC so that they're, because everybody says with all the surveys and all the indicators are saying that Ferdinand Marcos Jr. will win this coming election. So prior to that, ayan na, nakahanda na sila to protest the proclamation, to say that nandaya para siya manalo, because nakikita na natin yung trending as of now in social networking, in many of the statements being made by, of course, bloggers, etc., and all of that. So I'm mentioning this precisely because parang merong repeat performance of what it was in 1986, 36 years ago. So your question, whoever sent this question to me, not just one person but several, paano naging presidente si Mrs. Aquino? Well, by the hand of the most powerful country in the world at the time, yun na nangyari. So President Marcos, passing through the legal procedure of the proclamation for the office of the presidency, dumaan yan sa tinatawag na National Board of Canvassers, which is Parliament. You must remember at the time, we already had a parliament. Hindi ito yung Congress ngayon na may mga lower chamber, mayroong upper chamber. Wala, isa lang yan. Just one legislative branch. This was during the time of President Marcos, and that was Parliament, the National Assembly. Kaya nga ang tawag dyan, batasang pambansa. That is the Filipino term for the National Assembly. And they comprise the National Board of Canvassers. So through the several days that according to the law, according to the fundamental law, they were canvassing the votes from all the regions. Diyan nagkaroon ng tinatawag nga na bilangan nung summary na ng boto. And despite the fact that you had several returns from this board of canvassers that will set aside, kasi you had one of the members of parliament who was objecting to some of those returns. So tinabi yun, nilagyan ng asterisk at saka na lang daw babasahin or saka na lang isasama sa total number of canvassed votes kasi merong question. So nilagyan ng asterisk. So despite the fact that may mga tinabi, and despite the fact na nagkaroon din ng Citizens Arm, which is the NAMFREL, na nagbilangan din doon sa Lasal Green Hills, despite the fact that all of this was happening, panalo pa rin yung sa canvassing of votes si President Marcos by about 1 million or so votes. At ito, na-declare hindi lang sa Commission on Elections, ngunit sa doon mismo sa Parliament, sa National Board of Canvassers. So he was declared and proclaimed the winner as President of the Republic of the Philippines for that snap elections. Pero nag-object yung grupo ni Mrs. Aquino. Sabi nila, dinaya sila. At they did not accept the fact na constitutionally and legally, Marcos was the elected president. So what did they do? Yan, nag-rally sila all over the country kung saan-saan. After February 7 elections, sangkatutak na mga rally ang kanilang ginawa, objecting to the proclamation of President Marcos. But nonetheless, President Marcos took his oath of office as President of the Republic. Sinabayan naman ni Mrs. Aquino sa Club Filipino. Nag-oath of office din siya. Not according to the constitution that she should have followed, which is our Philippine Constitution, but according to what her legal advisors and her opposition group determined as mag-ano rin siya, mag-oath. And of course, she was supported by the United States of America bureaucracy. That is the office of Secretary Schultz. Nasulat na yan by Secretary Schultz himself sa kanyang libro. Sinulat niya yung procedure na yung pag-proclaim kay Mrs. Aquino. So to answer your question, yung sinabi niyo paano ba siya naging presidente, yun ang nangyari. She was supported by the United States of America when she took her oath of office. And then, so dalawa na yung presidente, anong gagawin? Well, there was already this threat that came, not just by words, but a physical threat. And it so happened that we were there in Malacanang when 2 helicopters were hovering over Malacanang and a bomb fell. So hindi naman talagang binagsak para patayin yung first family, pero panakot because they could have done it directly on the palace, on Malacanang itself. But it was within the vicinity, but loud enough and strong enough that we had to run, we had to scamper. From the ceremonial hall, we had to run to the study room. The chandeliers, yung mga nakapasok sa Malacanang, alam naman yung ang lalaki ng chandeliers yan. It's made of wood, pinagawa ni Mrs. Marcos yan sa paete. It's carved in wood. Yun yung malalaking chandeliers doon sa ceremonial hall. Talagang nagyanig, yumanig yun. Tapos yung mga kurtina talagang gumalaw and everything. So I was there. I heard the bomb. I felt the tremor and so forth. So yung panakot na yon, immediately after that, merong lumabas doon sa telefax kasi wala pang mga wala pa tayong tawag nito, yung mobile phone or so. So meron telefax na lumabas doon sa office ng information office. Merong lumabas na telefax na with the stationery and the letterhead of the United States Embassy, the Embassy of the United States of America, but it was unsigned. So ang nakasulat doon, I wish I had a copy here. I have a copy, but hindi ko kaharap ngayon. Sinasabi doon that if President Marcos would be attacked in Malacanang by the people or the opposition that is there in EDSA, you must remember, merong mga nag-rally sa EDSA rin in support of Enrile and Ramos. So kung yung grupo na yon ay parating na sa Malacanang at binomba na nga si Marcos doon, and he will retaliate with violence kung kung yung mga sundalo niya doon na nagpo-protection sa Malacanang, yung Presidential Security Group or whatever you would call them, papasok ang US Marines. Huwag siyang gumamit ng puwersa, that he should not use violence or force against the people that wala pa naman dun that will be coming over from EDSA to Malacanang. Ganon. So, nakita ninyo na the process is already there. As a matter of fact, sinabi nga ni Secretary Schultz sa kanyang libro, it was not a matter of how to take him out. It was a matter of when. So, nagintay lang ng timing. So, yun na nga. Kasi may mga sundalo si Enrile, tapos may mga tao dun sa EDSA, tapos binomba yung Malacanang. Pagkatapos sinabihan na kung magre-retaliate si Marcos ay papasok ang US Marines. Prior to that, you had on television, on live television, yung mga nahuli ng mga members of the armed forces na mga kasamahan ni Enrile na gustong pumasok na ng Malacanang para i-hostage na yung first family. Pero na-aresto sila doon sa before they were able to get to Malacanang. So doon pa lang, nakikita mo na talagang merong movement na to remove the Marcoses. So nung na-aresto yon, ang sumunod naman na nangyari yun ang kinwento ko na nagbagsak sila ng 2 bomba at pagkatapos ay sinabihan nga through a telefax which was unsigned but with the stationery para alam ng mga tao ni President Marcos and he himself na galing sa embassy ng Amerika. So yun na nga ang sinabi. And then of course, there were conversations between him and Senator Laxalt kasi hindi na siya makakonect kay President Reagan. President Reagan was already left in the dark by Secretary Schultz above everything else. They did not want Marcos to have a connection with President kasi kaibigan niya yun So siguro doon tatanungin ni President Marcos, what is this that's happening? So they kept him away from President Reagan at the time para magawa nila yung kanilang ginagawa precisely. So yun na, because of that threat precisely, baka naman talagang hindi lang bomba ang ihuhulog doon, baka whatever it is. And that is where President Marcos said, can you escort us? So ito to the American embassy officials, can you bring us now from Malacanang to my hometown in Lawag? Kasi while he is there is the threat na baka dumating yung US Marines, baka bombahin sila, baka pumasok yung mga tao from EDSA, and of course, to protect the family, the first family that they were there, and babies, yung mga bata pa yan sila, Borgie. So dun nga, Marcos decided na dalahin siya sa Lawag. But then, of course, at about 7:30 that evening of February 25, dinala siya sa Clark Air Base para magpahinga daw kasi 7:30 na ng gabi nung lumipad sila by helicopter to Clark. Well, about early morning, 3 or 4 o'clock. Ito na yung record ng kanyang aide-de-camp. This you can read from the book of Colonel Aroisa, because he wrote about this in his book From Malacanang to Makiki. Makiki is the place in Honolulu where they were exiled. Pero sinulat nga ni aide-de-camp ni President Marcos na nung nasa Clark Air Base sila, early morning, 3 or 4 o'clock, ginising sila, dinisarmahan sila kasi sila yung Presidential Security Group protecting President Marcos and the family. So dinisarmahan sila at sinabihan sila that they are going to be flown out of Clark Air Base, and for this rather hilarious reason, kasi daw yung Clark Air Base, kung nasaan si President Marcos, ay napaligiran na ng NPA. So would you believe that? But that's exactly what was told to President Marcos, and it is written by his own aide-de-camp that they were surrounded. And President Marcos also executed an affidavit regarding that they were wakened at about 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and they were told that they had to be flown out of Clark Air Base because Clark was surrounded by the NPA, by the communists that would want to kill him. Can you imagine? The biggest military air base in our country, held by American troops and soldiers and officials, mapapaligiran ng NPA. Oh my goodness. Anyway, nung nilipad na sila out of Clark Air Base and they were expecting President Marcos, the family, and the rest of those that were fetched by American vehicles, sila Mr. Cojuangco, the family of General Ver, and several others, including the staff of President Marcos. So when they were already airborne, doon na nga nagtaka si Mrs. Marcos kasi malapit lang naman kung eroplano ang Lawag Airport. Pero parang medyo matagal na silang lumilipad. So pinatanong niya sa piloto, bakit ang tagal na hindi pa sila nagla-landing? Yung pala, they were already being brought to Guam. And of course, the rest is history. And so what happened? Mrs. Aquino entered Malacanang, and that was when she assumed the office of the presidency. So that answers your question. So now we ask, ano nangyari nung naging presidente na siya? Well, she had her own revolutionary government, although they did not want to call it that. So nag-appoint na siya ng kanyang mga members of the cabinet. Tapos anong ginawa niya? Ang unang ginawa niya ay pinatanggal niya lahat ng mga elected officials. Elected officials meaning hindi na nag-convene ang parliament. Lahat ng mga governors, mayors, yung mga elected officials sa local government, tinanggal niya. Tapos nag-appoint siya ng mga OIC, officers in charge. Kaya yan, yung mga tao na yan, sila na ngayon ang umunlad from 1986. Yan sila Binay, etc. Hindi ko nasasabihin pa yung mga iba. So that was how she assumed the office of the presidency. And the first thing she did was to sign an executive order creating an office that will sequester all the properties known to belong to the Marcoses. Ang kanyang unang statement doon sa kanyang executive order, whereas the Marcoses as a family, associates, and friends amassed, nagkaroon sila ng maraming wealth from the Filipino people. So doon pa lang sa kanyang statement na yon, executive order number 1, sinabi na nagnakaw na sa taong bayan without the benefit of either due process or the law. My classmate, our valedictorian in the College of San Beda, College of Law, and also a bar-top natcher, mentioned to me that is considered a bill of attainder. Yun na nga, na talagang dun mismo sa sinulat niya ay andun na rin yung the accusation, parang ganun na. So yeah, they had executive order number 1, and then number 2, number 12, number 12A. 4 yan na executive orders na pinirmahan ni Mrs. Aquino kung saan, yun na nga, lahat ng suspected or alleged or nababalitaan na belonging to the Marcoses, yan na, kukunin yan ng PCGG, Presidential Commission on Good Governance. So ngayon, babalik tayo dun sa mga nagtanong, kaya nga tinanong nila anong nangyari pagkatapos nung naging presidente na si Mrs. Aquino. So yun, nasabi ko na nga na tinanggal niya yung mga associated with Marcos, hindi lang sa mga local government units, pero sa mga government offices din, pati sa judiciary din. Anybody na inappoint ni Marcos, tanggal yan. Tapos yung mga sa military, kasi karamihan nga dyan, mga sinasabing Ilocano, lahat pinadala sa Mindanao, o so kung sa mga tinatawag na battle zones doon. Tapos there was this term they used at the time, the Yellow Army, na sila naman ang nag-take over ng military at the time. So ganun ang first actions na, and there was so much in media na kinargahan na nila, pinalaki na nila yung executive order number 1 na sinabi nga na ang daming ninakaw ni Marcos from the Filipino people. Pero kasi si Marcos napadpad na ng Honolulu, doon na siya nilipad, hindi nila, this is the other question. Bakit hindi nila kinasuhan si President Marcos dito sa Pilipinas? That's a good question. So questions that need answers. Why did they not file the cases against President Marcos? Unang-una, anong case ang kanilang i-file? Graft and corruption. So kailangan nila ng mga ebidensya against the corruption of President Marcos na nagnakaw siya sa taong bayan. Pero natatakot sila at the time, or at least it appeared that since the country was divided between the opposition and the Marcos loyalists, baka magkagulo. So America also decided na it would be best to help Mrs. Aquino na to litigate or to put on trial President Marcos kasi andun na siya sa Honolulu, doon na lang siya litisin. So they had to look for a law. Anong American law ang na-violate ni Marcos para kasuhan siya sa Amerika? You know, meron ba siyang Amerikanong pinatay? Meron ba siyang Amerikanong ninakawan? Meron, you know, it had to be an American law so that he would be criminally indicted in America. So they found the law. It is called the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act Law. Ulitin ko para maintindihang mabuti ang racketeering influenced and corrupt organization. So they accused Marcos of running the Philippine government as a racketeering syndicate and a corrupt organization. And that is what he violated kasi ninakaw niya ang pera ng Pilipino. That's the RICO case. Now, can you imagine as a Filipino, regardless of what your political persuasion would be, that you would accept a foreign country accusing your government, kahit na hindi mo gusto si Marcos, accusing your government to be a racketeering influence and corrupt organization. So ang ibig sabihin nito, yung buong gobyerno ni Marcos, yan ang racketeering organization na yan. Parang yung, you know, the author of that law, na-interview ko yan sa New York. Sabi niya, nung sinusulat niya yung batas na yan, para yan dun sa mga mafiosi, mga mafia, the underworld, the sleazy Balzacian underworld, na ang hirap hulihin itong mga nagsasmuggle, involved in prostitution, yung mga involved in, yan, sa smuggling at lahat na yan, lahat ng illicit, illegal, underground crimes, na protektado sila kasi bayad nila ang pulis, bayad nila ang FBI, bayad nila lahat yon. Kaya nga, racketeering influence and corrupt organization. And kung sila nakatira halimbawa sa isang building, kasi sindikato, so pati yung doorman, pati yung driver, are part of the criminal syndicate. Parang the crime of one is the crime of all. Kasi yung kanilang capo di capo, yung kanilang godfather doon na kriminal, lahat na kasama sa organization yun. Yun ang kanilang batas na sinabi ni Marcos na kanyang na-violate, kaya pwede siyang litisin sa Amerika kasi merong 4 na real estate properties sa New York na sinabi nilang binili ni Marcos at yung pera ay galing sa pagnakaw sa taong bayan ng Pilipinas. So yun ang RICO case. Kaya isipin ninyo, hindi siya nilitis dito sa Pilipinas, naghanap sila ng batas sa Amerika na supposedly na violate ni Marcos at doon siya kinasuhan. Yun ang RICO case. Yung unang case na final nila ay sa LA. Kasi meron doon tayong nabili din ang ating pamahalaan na isang building doon sa, again, a very good location in San Francisco. Those of you who may have traveled there or live there, you know where Union Square is. So meron tayong Philippine building doon na ginagamit na consulate and used also by other offices, the Philippine Airlines and several Filipino offices. Plus, yung ibang spaces doon pinaparentahan. So yun, sinasabi din na nakaw. But very clearly, yun binili ng Philippine government because as now being mentioned, may resibo yun, pagbili. What happened to that building? That's the question again. Pinagbili ng GSIS manager. Yun, at the time, GSIS manager ni Mrs. Aquino, yung naging mayor din ng Quezon City after GSIS, binenta niya. Why? What is the reason for selling it? Sa gobyerno na ng Pilipinas anyway. So ano nangyari sa RICO case doon sa LA? Ang nangyari doon ay dinismiss yung kaso kasi nga walang ebidensya doon sa LA. Wala silang makitang evidence na nagnakaw, yung pera ay ninakaw sa Pilipinas. ang kanilang present sa case, sa korte doon, kay Judge Mariana Felser, ay mga newspaper clippings, yung mga headlines ng Inquirer, lahat ng mga dyaryo ng mga oligarchs, lahat yun ang present nila. And there was a witness that testified na authentic yung mga nakasulat doon sa dyaryo, yung sa mga headlines at lahat na yon, mga editorial, mga opinion, nagnakaw si Marcos, ganito kadaming ninakaw niya, lahat-lahat. Dinismiss because their newspaper reports, sabi ng korte. So nag-appeal ang mga abogado na hinire ng Philippine government because wala naman tayong abogado that could appear in the American court. So nag-hire ng mga American lawyers dun sa kaso na yon. You must remember, one of those that were supplying all of this was Jovito Salonga kasi siya yung chairman ng PCGG. Plus, of course, the entire cabinet and the entire government of Mrs. Aquino. So wala silang mapresenta na evidence ng nakaw. Kaya dinismiss yung kaso. Inakyat na yon yung kaso na yan sa Court of Appeals ng LA, the 9th Circuit Court of Los Angeles. Nag-appeal sila kasi nga natalo na sila, na-dismiss na doon sa lower court. Pagdating sa Court of Appeals, na-dismiss rin. Pero mas mabigat yung kanilang reason. Unang-una, kung sakaling merong anomaliyang ginawa, that is if, then it should be tried in the country of origin because of the act of state doctrine, which is accepted as part of international law and also of the law of America and the law of the Philippines. You have to try the head of that country as an independent sovereign. No other sovereign in another country should try it unless inakyat yan sa Criminal Court of Justice, which is an international court. Pero kasi doon inakyat yung appeal sa Court of Appeals ng 9th Circuit Court ng Los Angeles, sinabi nga, hindi pwede yung kaso na yan dito. Kasi ganun din ang dahilan. At sinabi nga doon na, well, you know, a couple of years ago, si Mrs. Aquino was in exile here in America. Ngayon, si Marcos naman ang in exile. Hindi natin alam, pwedeng magbaliktad ulit. So hindi natin pwedeng desisyonan yan because it's a political matter of the Republic of the Philippines. And it's the Republic of the Philippines that should determine this. You know, the origin, the nature, and the consequences of that particular violation. Kasi yung Corrupt Practices Act nila sa Amerika, sa LA, hindi uubra, hindi pwede. So yun na nangyari. So anong ginawa nila? Dinala, yung sa New York sila nagpatuloy ng kaso. So again, the same. The RICO case in New York. Kasi doon, 4 na real estate properties ang binili ng pera na nanggaling sa mga American banks, na nanggaling sa mga Swiss banks, na sinasabi nila na si Marcos ang may-ari ng accounts na yon. So, pag tinatanong nga ninyo, ano ba nangyari? Hindi nga siya nakadefensa sa sarili niya because that's a good question sapagkat hindi siya pinauwi to defend himself. Remember, that is a criminal case. And even in our laws and the laws of America, if you are indicted in a criminal case, you have to be in court to face your accusers. Hindi nga nangyari yon. So, ang nangyari sa New York, well, andun yung 4 na real estate properties. Ano ba itong real estate properties na ito na binili noong 1982 at 83? Or if my dates are wrong, then it must have been around that time, 82, 83. Ito yung nasa 40 Wall Street. Wall Street is the finance district of New York. Binili yan at ang amount noon was $70 million dollars. The other real estate property was the Crown Building. Sa New York din yan. 51 million yung building na yon. Then the other building was 200 Madison Avenue. Talagang makita mo yung locations. If you've been to New York, or kahit na tingnan mo sa mapa, i-Google mo, tingnan mo. These are really choice properties. 50 million yung sa 200, yung address ng 200 Madison. And then the other building was the Herald Center. Yan yung buong shopping center ng Macy's at lahat ngayon sa kasalukuyan. Pero at the time, ang tawag dyan was the Herald Center. And it was bought at $17.5 million. So ang total amount ng lahat na yan na binayad ng pera na galing sa American banks, na yung American banks na yan nang galing sa mga bangko sa Switzerland, yung pera the total was $188 million. So yun, bagsak kasi ang presyo ng real estate sa New York at the time. Kaya nga, nabili ang 4 na buildings na yan. Okay, so pag-uusapan nga yung mga tanong, paano nangyari naman doon sa mga buildings na yan na andun sa New York at the time. Yun na nga, kinasuhan nga si Marcos at si Imelda for stealing the money of the Filipino people and buying those real estate properties. So, yun na. Nagkaroon ng trial, close to 4 months. Tapos, nagpresenta sila. We must remember, 3 gobyerno yung nag-file, na nagtulong-tulong. Ang Swiss government, kasi yung Swiss banks ang pinanggalingan ng pera. Yung American government, kasi American banks din ang dinaanan ng pera na yon, at Justice Department ng Amerika ang nag-file. Justice Department prosecutors, naalala nyo si Rudolph Giuliani na nag-headlines pa na I will jail Imelda. I vow to jail Imelda. Tapos ang Philippine government, lahat ng dokumento pala na kinuha nila sa Malacanang, lahat ng dokumento na dala nila Marcos sa Hawaii, na kinuha nila from the Marcoses, lahat yan, pinagsama-sama nila, yung sinasabi ko nga, 350,000 pages of documents. Yan, kadami. Isang buong kwarto yan, isang katutak na filing cabinet. Nakita ko yan, nabasa ko yan, at natingnan ko lahat, halos lahat, yung mga dokumento na yan. Kasi yung iba pare-pareho rin, mga accounts, mga ganito. At nagpresenta rin sila ng 95 witnesses in that 4-month trial on that RICO case violation. Yung mga witnesses nila, may mga Pilipino, meron karamihan, pero karamihan, mga bankero, mga either presidente ng mga bangko, mga cashier, mga tellers, basta part of the financial world in Switzerland. May mga abogado ng mga Swiss government, abogado ng Philippine government sa Switzerland na hinire nila, at mga Pilipino rin na nagtestify. So 95 yan silang lahat. At tandaan ninyo, pati si Khashoggi nasali dyan sa kaso na yan kasi may mga paintings dyan sa New York, dun sa mga buildings at dun sa isang condominium na merong parang hindi naman merong parang nagkaroon ng bentahan. Well, I think you already know that now that lady who was part of the sale of these paintings, nakakulong pa nga hanggang ngayon. But anyway, kaya nasama si Khashoggi. At nagkaroon din kasi ng isang dokumento na nahanap nila sa, hindi lang sa Malacanang, pero not in Malacanang anymore kasi this is already after the fact, na sinasabi na binili o bibilhin ni Khashoggi yung mga buildings na yon at sa kanya yon. And this was part of the maneuver that was undertaken by Mrs. Tantoco kasi kaibigan niya si Khashoggi at saka alam niya yung mga transaction tungkol sa mga buildings na yon. At siya rin na nagsabi at that time na it is also the right time to buy those buildings kasi bagsak nga yung presyo. So whatever it is, she meant well. Pero ang nangyari, nasama si Khashoggi doon because of those documents. So yun ang nangyari sa New York. 95 witnesses, 350,000 documents, the United States of America, the Swiss lawyers, the Philippine government, lahat sila andun para litisin si Ferdinand at Imelda Marcos. Of course, ang lumabas dyan ay, nung patapos na yung kaso ng hearing, yung judge na mismo ang nagsabi sa prosecution, sa Justice Department ng Amerika, dun sa New York. You bring this celebrated case in my court, and when you remove the fancy ornaments, you tell me, gee, we can't find the documents. Bakit sinabi ni Judge Keenan yan? tandaan ninyo ha, si Judge Keenan, yung kanyang asawa, kaklase pa ni Mrs. Aquino sa Marymount, kung ano yung eskwelahan dyan sa New York when Mrs. Aquino was studying there. Kaklase niya yon. And even the judge said, so what? If my wife is a classmate of Mrs. Aquino, I will not execute her laws here. I will go by the justice system of America. O, yun ang Judge Keenan. And he was really prejudiced against Jerry Spence. Ayaw na ayaw niya si Jerry, naaano siya. Allergic siya kay Jerry Spence because Jerry Spence was a Wyoming cowboy lawyer from Jackson Hole. Biglang napadpad ng New York at he was wearing his cowboy suit at sinabihan nga ng judge, you dress up properly because this is a New York courtroom, di ba? Kaya Jerry Spence nga sumagot, sabi niya kay judge, this looks like a funeral parlor. You wear black. My client wears black. The marshals are in black. Lahat naka-black. Kulang na lang dito yung kabaong. We just need the coffin. Anyway, sinagot siya, but nagbihis na rin si Jerry Spence. Cowboy pa rin yung suot niya, pero itim na at meron na siyang kurbata. Hindi na yung, well, whatever it is that they wear in Wyoming. So anyway, so even the judge was not really inclined to favor Jerry Spence. So makikita niyo yung prejudice. But in spite of that, siya na rin mismo ang nagsabi, nasaan yung mga dokumento na nagsasabi na yung perang ginamit pagbili nito mga buildings dito sa aking syudad, dito sa aking city of New York, ay galing sa taong bayan ng Pilipinas. Where is the fraud? Saan yung nakaw? Wala. Not one single document. To this day. Remember, that is the mightiest sword of justice in the world at the time. The most powerful country. Pagpasok nga nung clerk of court, pagbang niya sa pintuan ganon. Please rise, all rise. United States of America versus Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. Imagine, patay na si Marcos noon, pero silang ini-indict doon. Nakakataas ng balahibo na America, the United States of America. Tapos, yun, si Imelda Biuda, andun sa court na yun. Nag-iisa, an orphan of her own country. At walang gustong lumapit sa kanya at the time kasi pwede kang kunin ng Justice Department ng Amerika at tanongin, o bakit andito ka ng interest mo? Gagawin kang witness or to testify against Imelda. Ganun na nangyari. Yung mga Pilipino nag-testify dyan, nagkaroon ng deal. Hindi ka na namin hahabulin sa taxes, kagaya ni Henito, kagaya ni Oscar Carino. Yan, yung mga yan. Basta sabihin mo lang na corrupt si Mrs. Marcos. But they could not say it. Because they had no evidence. They could only say na, oh, namimili siya ng bulaklak, o nag-hire siya ng ganito. But, saan ang galing yung pera? Saan ang galing yung pera na pumasok sa Swiss accounts? At yung pera na yon na nasa Swiss accounts, na ginamit ng pagbili ng mga buildings sa New York. Wala silang naipresenta ni isang witness na yung pera na yon ay galing sa atin, sa taong bayan, sa ating national treasury, sa ating budget. So, ngayon tinatanong ninyo, ano ba talaga nangyari doon? Yun na nangyari doon. Acquitted. Unanimous acquittal by the 12-man jury. Hindi lang 12, 18 kasi merong 6 na alternate na nag-a-attend din ng court sessions. Just in case merong isa doon mag-absent, isa magkasakit, o isa mamatay, merong kaagad substitute para lang hindi madiskaril yung tuloy-tuloy ng kanilang hearing. So up to this day, yan, ang mga tinatanong ninyo sa akin, ano nangyari doon, yan na nangyari doon. And yet, hindi yan na sinulat sa mga dyaryo. Hindi na rin pinag-usapan. Wala rin nag-comment tungkol dyan. 36 years, binaon nila yon. 36 years. At sinabi nga nila na, it was the silence of 36 years. Nagkaroon lang tayo ng pagkataon ngayon na pag-usapan yan sapagkat ito na nga yung mga tanong ninyo. So there you could see how important it is that certain questions that keep on repeating themselves really need answers. And that is one question.
Okay.
What did the Marcoses steal from the Filipino people? Since there have been no evidence or no witness that appeared in New York City, bakit hanggang ngayon kleptocracy nga ang tawag? Nagnakaw ng milyon-milyon. Yung milyon-milyon na yan na sinasabi, saan ang galing yan? Ito nga, binasa ko sa inyo yung mga amounts. $188 million in total amount ng mga buildings na yon sa New York City. So saan ang galing yan? Naku, ang dami-daming pera ni Marcos bumili ng building. Pero ninakaw ba yon sa taong? Where was that? Kahit na nga sa resibo. Kayo, the opposition now against Ferdinand Marcos keeps on talking about resibo. Saan ang resibo? Nagaling ito sa pera ng kaban ng bayan. And then, of course, that is why, that's one of the questions that was raised now here. And it is sometimes very difficult now that there's so many other questions kasi nga, pag titingnan natin talaga na na-dismiss na yon, hindi pala na-acquit na, ay inuulit-ulit pa hanggang sa kasalukuyan. Isang bagay yan na talagang ngayon, nasabihin na yung anak ay may kasalanan din sa mga ninakaw ng tatay. Wala na silang napatunayan na ninakaw ng tatay niya. I keep on repeating this because I myself, I can talk about this because I have seen the documents, I have read them, I was there every day during the trial. I wanted to hear and to listen to all that they had to say. Not just because as a journalist you were curious, but I worked in Malacanang and of course, I would be one of the first to want to know na itong mga tao na kinover ko for television, for the government television station, kung meron talaga silang ninakaw. And that was it. That is what came out. Ngayon, the other issue na tinatanong nga, yung mga human rights violation. Oh, a human rights violation is a criminal offense. So ang ibig sabihin nito, kailangan yung ina-accuse mo ay kailangan humarap sa'yo at sasabihin mo, ako tinorture mo, o yung ama ko, yung kapatid ko pinatay mo, and you are being asked to answer. But they did not allow Marcos to return to the Philippines. Bakit? Kasi yung kanilang final sa Honolulu, tandaan nyo ito. At basahin ninyo sapagkat court records yan, hindi ito invento. Court records yan. Yung final nila na kaso ng human rights is not a human rights violation case. 4 yan na tao nag-file na dinagdagan na lang ng 10,000 kung saan nanggaling yun natin alam. Ang kanilang final is a claim for payment, damages, without having to prove the damage that was done. Kung sino yung pinatay, tinorture, at nag-disappear, kung ano man yun, hindi na kinailangan, basta sinabi lang nila, tinorture kami, pinatay yung kapatid ko, pinatay yung ama ko, etc. So, nagkiklaim kami ngayon kay Marcos ng bayad. But they did not allow Marcos to return home to answer those accusations. At dito, sa Human Rights Commission dito sa atin, remember that was created by Mrs. Aquino, yung Commission on Human Rights, precisely para habulin nga si Marcos especially tungkol sa human rights violation. Yung mga chairman yan at yung board nila nag-certify simula nung buong term ni Mrs. Aquino, nung siya ay nakaupo dyan sa presidente, walang final na human rights violation kahit na sino against the Marcoses. Wala. So they certified that there was no human rights case filed against the Marcoses. Yan during panahon ni Mrs. Aquino. At pagkatapos, yung sumunod na administration din ni Fidel Ramos, ganun din. And speaking of Fidel Ramos, hindi ba siya ang head ng Philippine Constabulary? At yung Philippine Constabulary is the civil arm of the armed forces na may direct contact sa mga tao. Yan ang parang police ng army, ng armed forces. Bakit hindi siya nilitis? Bakit hindi siya tinanong? Bakit hindi ninyo inimbestiga? Si Enrile, andyan din, buhay pa, yung dalawa. In all these 36 years. Why did you not ask them, anong inutos ni Marcos sa inyo? Inutusan ba kayo na mag-torture? Inutusan ba kayo magpatay? Easy to ask. With the testimony that they can present, with an affidavit that they could sign. Marcos petitioned to return home when his sister died. Petitioned to return home when his mother died. Petitioned to come home when he was already dying in the hospital, to return home, to die here in his home country. All of this was denied by the courts. Nakaabot na sa Supreme Court. Anong sinagot ng Solicitor General ni Mrs. Aquino? To bring Marcos back to the Philippines is like having a dog return to his vomit. I have more than 50 other questions dito na humihingi ng kasagutan. Marami dito ay alam niyo na napag-usapan ko na, ngunit marami pa rin ang kailangan talakayin. Kaya ko lang po ito nilalabas sapagkat nangyari ito 36 years ago at ngayon ay hinahalungkat ulit. Kaya tayo ngayon na nagtatanong, dun sa mga nagtatanong, anong nangyari dito? Of the 1,000 cases that they filed against Mrs. Marcos, na-dismiss na rin lahat for lack of evidence, for lack of merit. At yan ay sinasabi nga, kasi nagnakaw sa taong bayan, walang preba na makita. We are going to have elections in 2 weeks. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is now leading in the surveys. All of this multitude of people that are supporting him will still have to be converted into votes. In the same manner, you have all of these other presidential candidates also expecting that the people that are supporting them would be converted into votes. Yung tinatawag na survey are just snapshots. Parang ano lang yan, maliit na bagay lang out of 2,000 being interviewed. But scientifically, that is indicative of the trending na sinasabi nga. So be that as it may, let us see what is going to happen on May 9. Sapagkat hindi lang yung conversion of votes na yan na boboto para sa mga kandidato. Tingnan natin yung mga makina kung saan papasok yung inyong mga balota. Sapagkat ang nagpapaandar ng mga makina na yan ay yung paring kumpanya na siyang nakita na even before na talagang merong ginagawang pagmaniobra sa pagdadaya. Sinong may-ari? Isa sa 12 public relations firm na hinire ni Mrs. Aquino nung kanyang administration. At nakipagkita rin kay Noynoy Aquino ng presidente na si Noynoy Aquino. Huwag naman sana mangyari na ganyan pa rin ang kanilang gagawin. Kung sino man ang kinakailangan talagang lumabas dito sa mga botong ito, ay ipagpatuloy na lang kung ano talaga ang kinakailangan para sa ating taong bayan. So be that as it may, I leave you with the questions that you have here, and perhaps at some later date, we can talk about them. But for now, let us offer our prayers that our people will be guided. You may not want this candidate, you may favor another candidate. That is part of your particular conscience already, to be able to decide for yourself. But always remember that there is the moral value in everything that we do. And that's exactly what should guide us. So dear God, guide us through all of this season of uncertainty and certainty, and help us to be able to decide according to the values and the traditions that we continue to hold sacred. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. Thank you for having joined me. This is Rita Gadi, and this has been your hour.